Good afternoon. George Freestone back again with, I think, installment 14 in our continuing series regarding visits that my wife and I made to all current and a few obsolete Major League ballparks. This particular visit was to Cincinnati. A lot of red in this image. You can see the view of the park from center field. And then looking back on the skyline, it's quite an attractive park. But we took this trip in 2015. And one of the things that we'll comment on is Pete Rose. Pete is one of the most accomplished baseball players to have played the game. Many, many records, but unfortunately, Pete also had an affection for gambling and some other things and wasn't always forthright about it. This t-shirt that I'm wearing, I picked up as we were leaving the park. There was vendors outside selling their wares, and I couldn't resist this particular t-shirt for Pete. Now, for those of you with terrific vision, you'll see the series of retired numbers, some of them at least, those that I'm not in front of right here. But interestingly, at the time we were at the park, Pete's number was not retired. We were there in 2015. However, in 2016, Pete's number was retired, and so now you'll find that recorded with the other retired numbers along that ribbon of the Great American Ballpark. And with that, we're going to get into the slide, and I'll talk to you a little bit more about the game and about our visit. Okay, let's not go to Atlanta quite yet. All right, I'm also going to move me here a little bit. So let's just see if I can. Yep, okay. All right, this visit was in May of 2015, as I alluded to in my introduction. The particular trip that we took, we drove from home, Wyomissing, Pennsylvania, to Cincinnati. We took in the city as well as the game, and then we drove southeast to Atlanta, but via the Great Smoky National Park, and we stayed for a day or two in Gatlinburg as well, and we'll talk a little bit about that as we get into these bullets. Then from there, we went to Atlanta where we saw a baseball game, saw what that city had to offer, and we'll talk about that shortly. And on the way home, we were very fortunate to have the opportunity to stop and see the Biltmore, which is right here in the upper right. As in all prior slides, and again, not in the YouTube rendition or the video, but instead in the Dropbox set of slides. These are actually active links and will take you to photo albums. There's actually three here, one for Cincinnati, one for Great Smoky National Park, and then one for the visit to the Biltmore. There'll be one for Atlanta too, but we'll share that when we get to the next game. The other thing that is a link is the box score and all the stats for the game in the lower right. And as you can see in the score that's summarized there, this was a veritable slugfest, as the bullet says. There were 28 hits, 20 men left on base. The game was settled by the eighth inning. It was 9-8. There was no additional scoring in the ninth inning, but still a very good game to watch if you're a fan of offense. So there you go. Now, I have been to Cincinnati as a city, as has Carol, for several different reasons. And during one of my earlier visits, I took a walk or a run around Riverfront, and the label on the stadium here says Sin Energy. So there was some money paid for being able to promote the name Sin Energy there. But that was the stadium that immediately preceded the Great American Ballpark that you see here and here. Now, the park that preceded that in Cincinnati is up in the right corner here, next to the Biltmore. And what's significant about that picture is Crossley Field was the first major league park to actually have lights. And I guess the first game that did have lights was a night game, was May 24th, 1935. It was the Reds versus the Phils. And I think that FDR, president at the time, flipped a switch in Washington to turn on the lights at Crosley. Those and many other interesting stories are covered right here in this book, Ballpark, which is a fabulous book about all of the various existing and many prior major league ballparks. Okay, I've talked about Pete Rose. We couldn't say enough about Pete's enthusiasm, his hustle, hence his nickname, Charlie Hustle. This is a book that I, within the last year, just finished. And it really does, I think, a balanced job of talking about Pete's prowess as a baseball player, and yet his flaws as a man, and his succumbing to gambling and other addictions, and not acknowledging what he was into. So will he eventually be named to the Hall of Fame? I don't know, but this book does a very good job. Now, this bridge in Cincinnati, crossing the river over to Covington, Kentucky, does a pretty good job of replicating another noteworthy bridge, noticeably the Brooklyn Bridge. And the reason for that is no mystery. It was designed by the same guy, Roebling. And so I just thought that was an interesting picture of the bridge. Now, before we move on, I'm going to cover a couple of the other photos that you see here. This photo and this one, including Carol, and this little black and white. I know I have a black and white version here hidden someplace of yeah, here it is, Smoky National Park. So that covers that part of the visit. Let's see. I have several pictures from the game. I think this is, let's see, Zach Cozart. Yeah, number two, Zach Cozart. We were very, very close to the action. And so you can see how close we were based upon the autographs going on. But that's Zach who's doing a nice job of entertaining a young fan there. In prior episodes, I've talked about, I think it was the Nationals game. I had a picture of um, Puig looking very dejected as he walked back to the dugout. And this one of Joey Votto struck me as a little bit similar, so I couldn't resist the opportunity to put that particular photo in. When we stopped in Gatlinburg, indeed, they had a bit of the Bubba Gump um, chain. And so there I am with the suitcase and sitting on the bench where Forrest might have been. But that was in Gatlinburg, Tennessee. And getting to Gatlinburg, we actually went through Pigeon Forge, which is where Dollywood is. And so there's a picture there. The stands have quite an interesting steamboat-like rendition in the backdrop, and you can see the smokestacks right there. I've talked about mascots for many of the other games that we've attended, and here are two of the four mascots for Cincinnati. This is Mr. Red and Rosie Red, and they were being up close and personal with the fans, many of them young fans, in front of us. during the preliminaries leading up to the game. Okay, I think, oh, well, this is me. Typically, I get a brat for most of the games, and indeed, there I am eating my brat during this particular game. Okay, I think we've talked about everything on this slide with the exception of this check engine. And I want to conclude this particular episode by talking about this story. When we were in Gatlinburg, Tennessee, I woke up one morning and went out to the car, warmed it up to get ready for whatever were going to do that day in Gatlinburg. This was not a travel day for us, fortunately. This was a day where we were going to spend some time in the Gatlinburg area. Well, interestingly, the check engine light came on. And so that was a little bit concerning to me. I, that's not something I typically ignore. So I did look for the nearest Subaru dealership, as this bullet indicated, and unfortunately, that was 100+ miles away. So I traded off either going to a Subaru dealer or to a local mechanic. But in talking with the guy at the Subaru dealership in Knoxville, he seemed to think, based upon our collective diagnosis of how the car was running, that it would be okay to drive it that 100 miles to Knoxville, Tennessee, to have the Subaru guys take a look at it, which is what we ended up doing. And so that put a little bit of a wrench into some of our works, but fortunately not a big deal. Now, the end of the story of this one is all they basically did at the Subaru dealership is reboot the intelligence in the car, and that resolved the issue. So the check engine light in that case was kind of a false warning, and we ended up spending a 200-mile round trip for basically a reboot of the car, but que sera. So we had a great time in Cincinnati. It was a great city. Each of us have been there a couple of times before. Thanks for your attention, and we'll be back with our next episode, which will take us to Atlanta. Thank you for your attention, and we will see you soon.